When I was a ranger, that's like a senior girl guide, about 15 years old, I read my first lesson in church. It was a church parade at our local United Church, and it seemed there were 1,000 people there, probably 200, and my voice echoed from the speakers. I was a shy kid and more than a little terrified. And it was today's passage from Ezekiel, the valley of dry bones. And I know that I did not read it half as well as Keith did today. Because honestly, I wasn't sure what it meant either. As a teenager, it seemed to me it was about, well, zombies. Maybe it was the inspiration for Michael Jackson's Thriller. Or that song, Dem bones, dry bones. You know the one. But it was something about bones being brought to life anyway, and just a little creepy. I later learned that this reading from Ezekiel is really a metaphor, an illustration about a whole dead people, the people of Israel, people who we consider at that time to be spiritually dead because they had lost their way away from God, who despaired of living with joy again, who found themselves distant from God. And isn't that sometimes our own human condition? Sometimes as humans we find walking like we're walking in something like the valley of dry bones. Loss, despair, of seeming distance from God. And it might be because we've broken some promises to ourselves or others. We've sinned. We carry regret. We carry loss. And we might even feel a bit like a zombie, going through the motions of life, but feeling dead inside. And we're probably not singing even Dem bones, because we feel sad. I wonder, I bet probably most of you have been in a room where grief or loss is very raw. That moment of terrible news when it seems your breath is knocked right out of you. Or maybe years later, when something out of the blue causes you to remember a loved one and suddenly you can't breathe anymore. It's like your life is pressed out of you. And we may ask at that moment, how can life go on? How can my dry bones carry me forward when the breath, the very spirit has gone out of me? We may ask, where are you, God? And we try to carry on and put a smile on our face and try and hum the little song, but we feel dead inside. But Jesus understands that suffering and despair. In our gospel text, Jesus weeps for his friend Lazarus. It's his friend who he loved like a brother. Jesus knows about our need for friendship and love, and he grieves over the loss of a close friend. And a lot of our gospel today was about grief, and Mary and Martha and the others weeping and lamenting, a scene of desolation of the human spirit. Our text says Jesus is greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He weeps. He understands human suffering and despair. Now that Ezekiel text seems to occur long after the weeping is over and there's just some dry bones left in the valley. And God commands Ezekiel to prophesy. And there was a noise, a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to its bone, and flesh and skin. And finally, God brings the bones back to life with breath. Life. Breath. The word in that text, the Hebrew word is ruah, with a rough R, ruah. And it means breath, or spirit, or wind. It means all three. And that word ruah is actually used 10 times in this passage in Ezekiel. And it's sometimes translated as breath, sometimes spirit, and sometimes wind. But it's the divine ruah, the breath of life, the divine spirit. God's ruah is the creative force in Genesis, the wind or spirit or breath that swept over the face of the waters at creation before God said, "Let there be light." And here in our Old Testament passage today, God uses that creative power in this valley of bones to inspire the people of Israel, to give them new breath, new life. And so also, Jesus uses his divine creative power to bring Lazarus back to life, to give him breath or spirit. This is the last of 7 signs in John's Gospel to show the people that Jesus is not just a wise teacher, not just a prophet who heals and does miracles, but that he is actually God, because only God could bring someone back from the dead. Only God commands the divine ruah, the breath, spirit, the wind that brings life. And you know, Lazarus really was dead. He's been dead for 4 days in a hot country. Yet still Lazarus calls him, "Lazarus, come out." This Jesus who calls out with authority, it's not the human Jesus who is just weeping. This is Jesus, God. God calling someone back from death, bringing back their life spirit, their very breath. I wonder if you noticed that they first have to push that stone away from the entrance to the tomb, as if to let the divine breath in. That stone that separated Jesus from Lazarus, that separated Lazarus from God. In our Lenten study on Wednesday, we considered what burdens, what guilt, regret, sin, loss, what we were carrying like a heavy stone, and how we might invite Jesus to help us push that stone away and open us up to the Holy Spirit, breathing life into our lives and bringing us back to new life. Because you see, that same life-giving breath of God, the Holy Spirit, moves through the world, raising people to new life, giving us hope in despair. Jesus comes to bring us new life. As he says to Martha, "I am the resurrection and the life. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die." And Jesus is with us now. He's with us today in the Eucharist. He's with us in our day-to-day lives. And he is with us, most especially in our suffering. He knows what it is to weep in despair, because he has wept too. He knows what it is to grieve, because he has grieved. He brings us the divine hope of new life. He is the living Spirit that inspires our lives and brings recreation, renewal, new life. This God, this Christ, whose divine breath, spirit, wind, ruah, brings new life. Jesus will be deeply grieved again in the Garden of Gethsemane, and again on the cross when he will call out to the Father, "Why have you forsaken me?" But we know that death will not, does not have the last word. Easter approaches. Jesus will be resurrected. The Holy Spirit will breathe new life into the world and into our lives. And this is why we are led through Lent to Easter by way of the cross every year, to remind us, to teach us yet again that God is with us, that Jesus died for us so we might live. And so I encourage you to experience the whole story in the coming days and be open to the working of the Holy Spirit, the divine Ruah. Enter Jerusalem with Jesus next week on Palm Sunday and listen to the account of his passion that foreshadows the week to come. Sit with Jesus and his disciples on Maundy Thursday as he shares bread and wine with them one last time and gives them a new commandment before he is taken away to be crucified. Kneel or sit before the cross as we experience his death on Good Friday. Maybe travel to Collingwood on Saturday evening to experience the great vigil of Easter and the light of Christ. I will be there. John will be our crucifer. And then return here in the light of Easter morning to rejoice that Christ is risen. To help you remember, to help us all remember in our bones that Jesus is the resurrection and the life, that everyone who lives and believes in him will never die. Thanks be to God.
Amen.